There is a ton of hype surrounding the Detroit Lions, as there should be. I mean, there's a lot of excitement to be had. They were a team that just barely missed out on a playoff spot. If Seattle just lost that last game of the season, they would have been into playoffs. And now they went out and added some pieces that could hopefully get them to be an even better team in a conference that now is weaker as well. So I get why the hype is there, but what I'm going to do in this video is not necessarily talk about, do I think they will live up to the hype, or do I think that they will make the playoffs at all? What I'm actually doing is the opposite. I'm just talking about the upside and downside of the Detroit Lions. What could go right for them, and if everything goes right, how good could they really be? Also, what could go wrong for them, and if things go poorly, how bad could this be? And it's interesting to do this with a team whose quarterback is Jared Goff, who's really had high highs and low lows towards his career, but maybe not necessarily game in and game out. He tends to be pretty consistent season by, or game by game, but more so season by season is where his ups and downs have been. I think at this point, though, we do know what Jared Goff is, which he's a guy who, in a good situation, in a good system, can play very well, and in a bad situation, in a bad system, plays very poorly. He's not necessarily someone who's going to elevate the roster too much, but if there's talent on the roster, he can get that talent, out of them. So, what is the talent on the roster? Well, for one thing, maybe the best offensive line in football. Right, great stuff with the Taylor Decker, Penei Sewell tackle tandem, Frank Ragnow, one of the best centers in the league, and Vitae and Jonah Jackson, very good guards as well to make five dominant. A dominant force of five at the offensive line. The receiving core is where we talk about the upside and downside. And again, I'm kind of not including injuries in this because that's too hard to predict. And you could say that about any team; they could get injured. But with the Lions, their receiving options is very fascinating. I think the upside is that it just, whatever happened last year happens again, right? Of all these different pieces can play well as role players, and Amon-Ra St. Brown can be that kind of Cooper Kupp guy who does so many different things in unique ways that can sort of really get this offense to go, and is incredibly well coached by Ben Johnson. I think the other, again, high upside thing is Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams will be suspended for 6 games. That just is what it is. But you know what? The Lions are more focused on making the playoffs and doing something in the playoffs as opposed to the first several games of the year. So the upside is that once he does come in and play, if he could live up to the potential, he was my favorite wide receiver of that draft class. If he could come in and be a true number 1 wide receiver to play on the outside, this could be potentially awesome. And when you factor in, they did draft Jahmyr Gibbs, which, listen, probably shouldn't have drafted him when they drafted him, right? But he also probably will have value right away. And so if all those pieces can work out, this could potentially be a top 5 offense. And the way you win Super Bowls is with top 5 offenses, typically. Although you do need a defense to come through as well. And again, there are some high upside things. I think if the Lions are a Super Bowl contender, it's probably going to be because Aiden Hutchinson takes the next step and becomes an elite level edge rusher, which is totally possible. And you also have James Houston, who in a small sample size showed some really nice things. In a bigger sample size, what will he be able to do? Well, we're going to find out this season. Even talking about the the high upside stuff and upside downside, still don't really see a high upside too much with the Lions' run defense. I don't know what exactly we're going to be getting there. Although I do think Jack Campbell could come in and do some nice things. Another guy who they kind of got some criticism for drafting when they drafted him, but at the same time, someone who could potentially fill a need. And again, if we're talking upside, there is potential upside with him. The secondary is the other, really, I mean, there's an upside and downside in this exact thing, which is kind of the case of secondaries in general. Very fluky year in and year out. Guys will have, great careers, but with down seasons. Guys will have terrible careers, but with, great seasons. Hard to predict. But they went out and added Cam Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and Brian Branch. So outside of Tracy Walker, we have a completely new secondary. And a secondary of players who I think on paper, I expect each individual one to add something to that defense. I do. The question is, these are guys that have not played together. This is a completely new group of guys. 5 guys who played for 5 different teams last year are probably going to be the starting 5 in the secondary, you would assume. So they're going to have to learn to play with each other. And for a team that likes a lot of zone coverage, it could be a bit of a work in progress. And the downside for the secondary is they never figure it out. They're never able to fully work on it, and it just ends up looking rough. The upside is, okay, maybe even if it takes them a couple of games, like I said, the goal is not to start off 5-1. The goal is to end the season in a playoff spot and be in position to go on a run. And the secondary is good by then, and you have a great pass rush. Okay, teams might be able to run on you a little bit, but you're still going to be okay. If you can have a top 5 offense and a top 10 secondary in the NFC, that would put them in championship contention for sure. So if we're talking the upside of the Lions, we'll start off there. I do think that, their upside, it's not as high as, I don't think it's as high as Philadelphia's. I don't know if it's as high as maybe a couple other teams like San Francisco's, but their upside is probably higher than I would project. Certainly San Francisco and probably the Eagles as well. I think their upside could be at least at that level of a team that could be as good as I'm expecting Philadelphia to be. I am very high in Philadelphia, though. So, like a 13-win team. Is that the Lions' upside? I would say yes. And so their upside is being a contender to win the NFC. They probably, even in my mind, would be underdogs against whoever comes out of the AFC, whether it be Kansas City or Cincinnati or whoever. But if you're in a Super Bowl, you have a chance to win it, obviously. So that's their upside. Their upside is winning the Super Bowl. There's a chance they can do that. I think so. I won't say 0% chance. I think they have a chance to win the Super Bowl. The downside, there is a downside here. There absolutely is. The secondary never gets it together, so they still have a bad defense. Maybe Aiden Hutchinson is still very good next year, but isn't quite TJ Watt next year. That's possible. And then I think the other downside is the receiving core going to repeat what it did last year? They did lose DJ Chark, who I think, I don't think it's the end-all, be-all, but I thought he did some nice things for them last year. What are we going to get out of, again, Jameson Williams, who, if he doesn't take that next step, they do have severe lacking in depth sort of to round out this roster. I think that's reasonable to say in the receiving core. There's not a lot of depth here. We're expecting it to be good because Ben Johnson was awesome last year, but we are kind of banking on a 1-year sample size, and that's the downside. The downside is if the secondary doesn't get it together and this offense isn't a top 10 offense next year, I'm not even sure if they're a playoff team at that point. So I do think their downside is missing the playoffs. I think their upside is being a Super Bowl contender. So that's kind of why I think the Lions are such a fascinating team. What am I predicting? Well, I've said that on the podcast. Check that out on the NFC North preview. You can hear all my thoughts, positive and negative. I think this is the boom or bust team. I really do. I think the Lions are boom or bust, and we'll see which one they do. I guess boom, bust, or just play solid. Them being a solid playoff team is also in the cards, but I think that there is boom potential and bust potential with this team, I guess is the way to phrase it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. Of course, as always, thanks for watching.